Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Fingus, Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters. Last fall, VCV joined forces with the Vermont Natural Resource Council, VPIRG, Hunger Free Vermont, Planned Parenthood Vermont Action Fund, and Public Assets Institute to hold 8 panel discussions across 6 counties and spoke to over 500 Vermonters to demystify H.R. 1, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, and give them the tools to stand up for their neighbors to stand up for their neighbors amid unprecedented tax giveaways, cuts to health care, and food assistance, and an effort to decimate environmental protections and renewable energy. From Brattleboro to Bennington to Barrie, we heard over and over that Vermonters expected state government to protect them from the dangerous and destructive actions of the Trump administration. Vermonters stood in solidarity that they valued supporting their neighbors and communities over austerity and needless cuts. The budgets and massive cuts being forced on Vermont by Donald Trump and the Republicans in Congress are immoral. They are hurting the most vulnerable Vermonters by cutting services to the poor in order to pay for tax cuts for the rich. That's why we are standing here today on the day that Governor Phil Scott releases his budget, to send the message to Governor Scott that his budget isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet, that it is a moral document that reflects his values. Every number in Governor Scott's budget represents the lived experience of Vermonters and their needs for affordable and accessible food, health care, energy, housing, and so much more. We are here today to urge Governor Scott to take a different path than that taken by federal Republicans and President Trump, and to reject furthering his party's immorality. We are calling on Governor Scott to craft a budget that reflects Vermont's values, a budget that protects the most vulnerable, grows our local economy, and preserves the environment and Vermont's special way of life. Today we'll hear from Vermonters and policy experts who will share the impacts of federal cuts to Vermonters and how we can have a Vermont budget that shows Vermont values. First, we will hear about federal cuts to food assistance and what that means for Vermonters from Nora Horton, Executive Director of Hunger Free Vermont. Nora?
Thanks for being here, everyone. Hunger has been steadily increasing in Vermont over the last 3 years, and Hunger Free Vermont is here today to say that we don't have to settle for this intolerable trend. Hunger is caused by one thing only: people not having the income and other resources they need to meet all of their basic needs at the same time. And H.R. 1 attacks many of our basic needs all at once. 3 Squares Vermont, SNAP, is our food security and economic stimulus program, funded with our tax dollars to protect the 40% of us and our neighbors and family members who will need to use it at some point in our lives. H.R. 1 pulls our money from SNAP and gives it to the wealthiest among us, needlessly and deliberately creating more hunger and poverty. There are 3 actions that our state government can take this year to prevent the federal cuts enacted in H.R. 1 from continuing this alarming trend. And we're here to call on all of our lawmakers, all of our state policymakers, all of our legislators to take these 3 actions now. The first is to fully fund the cost to administer 3 Squares Vermont, including the planned technology upgrades that will make SNAP more user-friendly in Vermont. We need to help more people connect to this vital program, not fewer. The second is to leverage every federal dollar to expand food security for all of us in Vermont by investing in a system of benefit assisters trained to help people get over the new paperwork and reporting barriers imposed by H.R. 1 for both SNAP and Medicaid, so we keep as many people as possible connected to the benefits we all may need and we all deserve and we all pay for. And the third is to raise revenue so our lawmakers have some resources to work with as they work with us to craft a smart and Vermont-centered strategy to get us all through this challenging time together. Here in Vermont, we have the collective power to stay on the road we have started down toward a food secure and climate resilient future where we all have the nutritious and locally produced food we need and want in a thriving food system that treats all who work within it with dignity and can feed us through the storms and the floods to come. We call on all of our state elected officials to make policy choices in this legislative session that ensure the best possible outcomes for all of us in Vermont. Policy choices that keep us connected to food benefits and health insurance, and that stay true to our commitment to protect the precious human and environmental resources that make possible the Vermont we all love. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Honor. Next, to hear about the federal GOP attacks on healthcare and how that is impacting Vermonters, we will hear from Jessica Barquist, Vice President of Public Affairs for Planned Parenthood Vermont Action Fund.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Vermont has the highest healthcare costs in the world. At the December legislative briefing, we learned that on average, people living in the United States spend 7.9% of their annual income on healthcare, while in Vermont, that average is 19.6%. Planned Parenthood is a critical provider in this healthcare landscape. PPNNE, Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, provides free care and supports Vermonters who cannot afford this type of expense. PPNNE sees everyone who needs care regardless of their ability to pay, and over half of their patients have low incomes, defined as less than twice the federal poverty level. Last fiscal year, PPNNE provided over $1 million in free and discounted care to communities right here in Vermont. This so-called Big Beautiful Bill, H.R. 1, which passed in July, impacts Planned Parenthood directly by prohibiting providers from participating in the federal Medicaid program for a full fiscal year. While this will lapse in June, the attacks continue. Just last week, a new framework was released in DC detailing plans to permanently defund Planned Parenthood healthcare providers. According to a recent Guttmacher Institute study, if Planned Parenthood were to close more health centers in Vermont, our federally qualified health centers would need to increase their patient load by 206% to cover PPNNE's caseloads. This is unsustainable. More broadly, H.R. 1 will also make sweeping changes to Medicaid, which 168,000 or 26% of Vermonters utilize. These changes include the addition of work requirements, increased administrative burden, and add restrictions for certain populations. While these changes are specific to Medicaid, they will have disastrous impacts on the healthcare system more broadly and for the sustainability of our already struggling healthcare providers. As many as 45,000 Vermonters could lose health coverage as a result of this. But most of these things won't go into effect until 2027, after midterm elections. This is on top of the many Vermonters who saw their Affordable Care Act tax subsidies expire this year, causing their health insurance premiums to skyrocket, making insurance coverage unaffordable for many. When people don't have adequate health insurance coverage, they delay necessary primary care, making our communities sicker and the healthcare expenses even higher. This is a vicious cycle that we need to get out of. As advocates, it is our job to say what is important, and it is on the state and the legislature to prioritize how to fund the items that we deem important. What Vermonters need today is a sustainable, efficient healthcare system that meets their needs. Our state budget reflects the priorities and values of our state, and we hope to see healthcare reform as a pillar of the state budget being unveiled today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Next, to talk about how the Big Beautiful Bill and GOP attacks on climate have affected Vermonters' environment and economy, we'll hear from Johanna Miller, Energy and Climate Program Director for the Vermont Natural Resource Council.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning and to be joined in solidarity with so many important partners coming from very different perspectives, but all in solidarity to elevate the deeply devastating and consequential impacts of the Big Awful Bill. And we hope that we can come together and call on the governor and state policymakers to step in and step up at this crucial moment. Again, as you've just heard, there are many cruel and consequential impacts of H.R. 1 that are already hurting Vermont families and our economy. When it comes to climate action and clean energy, that's also true. We know that the ever-intensifying effects of climate change exacerbate public health impacts. They exacerbate food insecurity. They create economic challenges and consequences. For example, the floods that we saw in 2023 and 2024, on the very day, exact same day, those floods have had dire impacts on public health. They have decimated our state and community budgets, including my own community here in Montpelier, which is still reeling from some of those consequences. And they put food insecure families in the crosshairs. So we have an obligation and an opportunity to help Vermonters get off of fossil fuels, the fossil fuels that are destabilizing our planet, and help them stay warm, get where they need to go, and power their lives with other cleaner energy options. We know that has benefits for our economy because in Vermont we don't mine, frack, or drill. So that means that we import every single fossil fuel that we use. So we have an economic opportunity to get off of fossil fuels and help Vermonters access cleaner, more renewable local energy supplies. So what that means in this moment and what we hope will be reflected in the governor's budget and in our ongoing work into the future means maintaining and expanding our commitment to clean energy, not stepping back from it. Again, this is also good economic policy. Wind and solar are now the cheapest forms of energy to deploy. They're the fastest forms of energy to deploy, which is why the Trump administration's sledgehammer to clean energy and renewable resources is so short-sighted. As you've just heard, there are many consequential impacts that are hurting Vermont families when it comes to public health, when it comes to food insecurity, and so much more. But the damaging consequences of stepping back from clean energy are deeply short-sighted. So in the short term, it's really important that lawmakers, keep vulnerable households safe during our cold winters. That includes making sure that we fund LIHEAP. But again, we must also ensure that we maintain our commitment to clean, renewable resources, helping our Vermont families get off of fossil fuels, which is why it's so important to make sure that we turn to the 2025 Climate Action Plan that was crafted through a robust public process and look to and lean into and implement the recommendations outlined in that plan as strategies that help Vermonters affordably and equitably get off of fossil fuels and also help our communities become more resilient as we really respond to the effects of a changed climate. So it is my deep honor and pleasure to be here working in solidarity with these organizations and so many others that are committed to helping Vermont's most vulnerable and helping Vermonters respond in this moment as we react to the impacts of the H.R. 1. So it's really an honor to be here with you today, and I'm excited to turn it back to Dan.
Thank you, Joey. Our last speaker will be talking about the tax cuts included in the Big Beautiful Bill, specifically tax cuts for the rich and service cuts for everyone else, and that is Annika Heilweil, Fair Share for Vermont Campaign Manager.
Hi everyone, my name is Annika and I'm here with the Public Assets Institute as the campaign manager for the Fair Share for Vermont campaign, which advocates for increased taxes on the wealthiest Vermonters to raise state revenue. I'm here on the day of the budget address because Vermonters need and deserve a state budget that is responsive to our state's needs and makes necessary investments in our communities. Investments in our infrastructure, our state government, our transportation system, our healthcare system, and much more. And our state budget must recognize the moment we are in, as federal funding streams are being compromised. To mitigate the effects of federal funding cuts and make needed investments in Vermont's future, we must ensure that the wealthiest Vermonters are paying their fair share in taxes. Due to the passage of H.R. 1, the top 1% of Vermont income earners are set to receive an average annual tax cut of $57,000 per year per filer. In total, the top 1% is set to save over $200 million in federal taxes just in 2026. The top 20% of Vermonters are set to save over $730 million in federal taxes. This is the latest in a long string of federal tax cuts that have disproportionately cut taxes for the wealthiest at the expense of all of us. And here in Vermont, the top 1% of income earners pay a smaller portion of their income in state and local taxes than many middle-income Vermont families. As we enter a period of increased pressure on our state budget, it is important that we look to the resources that we have. This year, our policymakers will have a decision to allow this massive transfer of wealth from most Vermonters to the wealthiest, or to recapture those federal tax cuts at the state level to make needed investments in our communities. Congress and the President are taking our hard-earned tax dollars to give massive tax breaks to the wealthy and corporations. Meanwhile, too many Vermonters are struggling to make ends meet and are worried about the future, and we can see it in our communities. Now more than ever, it's time for the wealthiest Vermonters to pay their fair share, so we can build a future for Vermont that works for everyone.
Thank you, Annika. After hearing about all these federal attacks and needs of Vermonters, it is even more clear that we need a budget from Governor Scott that supports all Vermonters and reflects the values of Vermont. Governor Scott, today is the day you can clearly show the difference between the dysfunction and harm of federal Republicans and the way that we do things in Vermont. Now we're happy to take questions.
From ET Digger. I'm wondering if on the sort of healthcare reform side of things that you mentioned, Jess, are there specific avenues that you're particularly looking for in terms of increasing revenue or allocating to sort of begin to compensate for these massive cuts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that is still being discussed, but we are a proud supporter of the Fair Share Coalition work.
I have a similar question for Annika. Can you maybe give us a feel for the type of taxes that you think would accomplish the goals you outlined for taxing the rich?
The Fair Share for Vermont campaign supports a couple of different options, basically a couple surcharge options, and one of those is directly mapped onto federal tax cuts. So we support a plan that would increase taxes on income over $250,000 by about 2%, and income over $500,000 by about 5%, which would recuperate approximately 100% of the tax cuts for the top 1% and approximately 10% of the tax cuts for the next 4%. I'm sorry that was a ton of numbers being thrown at you.
Increasing state income taxes to compensate for the commensurate drop in federal income taxes.
That is correct. We also support something called the wealth proceeds tax, which would tax unearned income that receives, a majority of which receives preferential treatment at the federal level in order to basically close some loopholes. We've already seen some legislation being introduced by different members of the House. Last week, Representative Teddy Wazazak did a walkthrough of 3 bills in House Ways and Means, all of which are kind of pointed toward progressive revenue with an eye toward these federal tax cuts, 2 of which were income tax surcharges or bracket changes.
Anything about second homes that's come up regularly as a potential tax increase source?
Yeah, we're still watching the conversation on the second homes tax. It's kind of in the middle of things with how it interacts with Act 73. So we're watching, and I'm sure we'll have thoughts down the line as it progresses.
And a question for Joey on climate, if I could. Quickly, Joey, what are you looking for in the governor's budget in terms of funding specific programs that would implement the
Well, for example, one of the top recommendations of the Climate Action Plan was to establish a greenhouse gas emissions reporting program as you can't manage what you don't measure. So if we don't have a better sense of how many fossil fuels we're using for heating and transportation in particular, on a more, not just on the aggregate scale, this is really important for any potential policy framework that might also ensue. The Climate Action Plan recommended establishing greenhouse gas emission reporting first as a potential precursor to joining a cap and invest program, for example. We need money to do that work. The Agency of Natural Resources put together a memo and said it's an $800,000 investment that needs to be made. $300,000 is sort of a one-time investment to stand up a program and create the infrastructure to create that kind of reporting program. So that's one fundamental investment. That was a almost unanimously supported recommendation in the Climate Action Plan. Matt Cota, who represents fossil fuel dealers, was the only one who was not supportive of establishing a greenhouse gas emissions reporting program. So I'm hoping that $800,000 for that really critical program will be in the governor's budget. Beyond that, as I mentioned, like, again, investments like flag heap and things that make sure that Vermonters stay warm in our cold climate. There's also going to need to be some funding for implementing the Climate Superfund. We'll see if those dollars are in the budget as well. They're not huge investments this year, but they're crucial. And so we know that there are lots of investments that the state needs to be making, and it's a strained, these are challenging financial times, but those are two I really do hope to see in the budget.
I have another climate question while you're
Yep.
still up there. Recently, my colleague Austin Gaffney reported that for the Farm Security Fund, House approves changed the climate-based phrasing to weather-based, and I'm curious if this is something that you all are watching more broadly in terms of language given kind of like the federal climate
Yep.
and what is available to us.
I hadn't heard about that particular change, but yeah, I think, we are watching to see what, how people are reacting to this moment of climate denial at the highest level of government. I think that Vermonters know that climate change is real, it's happening, and it's caused largely by the combustion of fossil fuels, adding more CO2 and destabilizing our planet. So it's my hope that we continue to, speak truth to power and stand behind science and facts. So we'll continue to watch that, and I can look into that as something I've not yet heard.
Any other questions? All right, thank you all.